Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Aftermarket Insider podcast. I'm your host, Joe Sebergandio, and boy, do we have a great podcast in store for you today. I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors over here at Pioneer Car Electronics. You know, Pioneer is the global leader in car electronics and a proud supporter of automotive enthusiasts everywhere. No matter what you drive, Pioneer has the gear to upgrade your ride to sound better and to connect with the latest technology. Examples like Bluetooth, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and new for 2020, Amazon Alexa. Remember, don't break up with your car, upgrade it. Learn more from our friends at pioneerelectronics.com. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is your podcast for April the 21st, 2020. I'm your host, Joe Sebergandio, and I've got to tell you that this podcast was one that I was pretty excited about. I have had a chance to be involved with a variety of events over my career, and the recent Riyadh Car Festival that was a part of the Saudi Seasons 2030 celebration was an epic event. It was historical in so many ways, and our guest this afternoon is one of the leading guys behind the car festival in Riyadh. His name is Peter MacGillivray. He's a name that many of you are familiar with. He and I met each other back in the days of Peterson Publishing Company, where I got a phone call one day from Steve Campbell. Steve was our group editorial director, and he was all excited. He came into my office when I was the publisher of Sport Truck about a new hire, some kid from Hot Boat Magazine that was all excited to maybe join the Peterson team. And before you knew it, Peter was in the office. He spent about an hour with me the first day and then had to rush home because his wife, Diane, was giving birth to their daughter, Alex. But from that point on, we became good running mates, working together as the publisher-editor duo of Sport Truck Magazine. Peter shortly found his way on the sales and marketing end of it and became publisher of Chevy High as well as JP Magazine. Did a tremendous job with those books, which led him to the job of the hottest property that we had at the time, which was Super Street. Peter was the publisher of Super Street Magazine after Sport Truck and did some great things with Super Street as well. Peter parlayed many of those skill sets into a really big job at SEMA. Peter was vice president of events and also took care of their publishing assets like SEMA News and worked with their PR department. And I believe Peter was a part of 20 successful epic SEMA shows before he recently transitioned and went to work at Bonnier Events as their vertical leader for the Motorsports group. I had the luxury of being a part of this Bonnier Motorsport event team and have been working with Peter for over a year now, along with Jonathan Moore and Melissa Dowd and Jerry Pitt. We've had a good run at it. But the Saudi trip is the reason why we're talking to Peter today. That event, the Riyadh Car Festival, when we look back at that, was history in the making. This was not your standard international car show by any means. So the things that we did there with the help from our exhibitors, those folks that brought vehicles, as well as the celebrities that joined us, was very, very, very well received in Saudi. A lot of questions have come up after the show about a possible return engagement. And a lot of questions have been coming up. Most of the responses from the event were great. I personally had a good time, but none of that matters. What really matters is how this thing went down. What were some of the challenges? And ultimately, what was the success for those that attended? With that said, I'd like to bring in our guest, who's going to be our exclusive guest today. This story is going to be so deep that we wanted to save all the time for Peter. As a result, we'll come back next week with the Barnes Report, where Clarence Barnes will join us with some of the latest news and inside skinny and gossip happening in the industry. We'll be back for our third podcast next Tuesday, the 28th, where we'll be joined by Ira Gabriel from SEMA, as well as Brad Gerber from the NHRA. We'll get the status on many of their events, including the upcoming NHRA schedule, as well as the SEMAYOUNGGUNS and the upcoming SEMA show. So with all that said, let's welcome to the podcast, Peter MacGillivray from Bonnier Motorsport Events. Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe. Glad to be on. Emmanuel, thank you. If anything goes wrong, I'm blaming you, E. So,
Well, in typical podcast fashion, Peter, we'll probably have a snafu or two, but hey, it's all fun. Peter, you seem to be wearing the quarantine well. How are you getting your arms around this whole Corona pandemic? I mean, we've been locked in the house now for what, going on 5 or 6 weeks. I know you're out and about. You probably travel more than anybody that I know.
not anymore.
How you make it out?
Well, it's funny. You mentioned my transition from SEMA to Bonnier. During the last decade of my tenure at SEMA, you may or may not know it, but I was commuting back and forth between the East and the West Coast. And when I ultimately, about a year ago, moved from Los Angeles to Boston full time, that's driven in large part because I wanted to live with my wife. I love my wife. I love my family. I love my home. And I'd had kind of enough of going back and forth. And so now it's come full circle where Diane and I are working out of the house together, and we're ready for her to go back to her office. We can check the box. Spent quality time with my wife. So,
well, that is very important. That's for sure.
It's great that, and I feel blessed that I can joke about it a little bit, because these are really serious times for people on a personal health level, but also on a business level. And I'm so blessed that that we're all healthy, including my 90-something-year-old parents, and all of my friends are healthy. And so we just got to get through this. We just got to stay at home, wash your hands. And I know, Joe, you kiss everybody that with a pulse. So whether it's the checkout lady or whoever, we can kind of put a mask on, wash your hands, don't touch anything, stay at home. Let's get through this so we can get going with our lives and our businesses, and just fun that we've all enjoyed.
Yeah, we're all anxious to get out there. Make no mistake about it. I sit here hopeful that we will be out marking off space in DuQuoin, Illinois, and that we'll be laying out the midway at the Sandsport Super Show. Those are all things that we're looking forward to. Peter, there's a lot of folks that may be home now watching the podcast or listening to the podcast. And thank you for those of you who are. In fact, you may want to tell a friend.
Both of you.
Well, we're down to one now. I think your mom left. There are some folks, Peter, that find themselves in somewhat of an awkward state. They may have been furloughed or laid off, and in some cases even worse. You had a nice transition from SEMA to your current position at Bonnier. Can you share a little bit of insight, or maybe offer some tips, or maybe some things that worked for you that may help others who find themselves in a similar spot now where they're out of employment?
I think networking with your friends, it's funny. I've been one of those people that people have reached out to looking for advice and looking for an introduction. I think the reality is it's pretty unlikely that your next job is going to happen by osmosis. If being employed is important to you, you got to make it a priority, and not be too proud to pick up the phone and start networking. And I've been lucky to be on the receiving end of some of those phone calls where people are out there looking. And it's funny because there are people out there, and certainly the few times it's happened to me where somebody's looking for a job and somebody has just mentioned that they're looking for somebody, that happens. And there are people out there that take a little bit of pride and are flattered that when they can make professional matchmaker or be professional matchmakers when it comes to connecting somebody who's looking for a job with somebody that's got a job opening. And so my first bit of advice is to use your network and just let people know what that you're looking for, that you're available, and refresh their memory of the interests and the expertise that you have. We live in a world now where it doesn't have to be a phone call or face-to-face meeting. There are beautiful technologies like LinkedIn that are out there, and I think that leveraging Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, all of the above, use your personal network to connect with people and let them know. And
some folks have there's like a two-prong approach some people may take when they find themselves out of a job, especially a job that you have a reputation for having. A lot of your social activities are based around your job. When you lose a job like that, some folks either go into a shell and don't want to talk about it, or others will go aggressively let the folks know that they're available. I guess what I'm hearing is that you're suggesting that they take the latter.
I guess it's all a matter of priorities. If you're somebody that needs a job and needs to work, and most of us are that person, if you're out of a job, you got to work it. You've got to get out there and beat the pavement. And during challenging times like these, you've got to make even more of an effort and use your personal network, your virtual network, to spread the word. And I actually did something recently on LinkedIn, and I was really surprised with the results that I got. And the people I was hearing from, I'm blessed now that I'm not in a position, I don't think, where I'm looking for a job. I love what I do, and but I can sympathize with people who are in a different place. And not only my person, if I know you, I'm happy to help. But really, this advice, it's kind of common sense. But to your point, sometimes when people are going through that emotion, they need a little bit of a motivation and a push. So if this does that, then by all means, embrace it. Go for
So
it.
if you're out there and you're viewing the podcast and you find yourself in this situation, by all means, stay positive. It's kind of awkward right now where folks aren't even going into the office in some cases. But I had a conversation with Catherine Reinhardt, who recently went from MagnaFlow over to Four-Wheel Parts Wholesalers. And we were talking about a few things, and topic had come up about some folks out of work in the industry. And she was very positive about the fact that once some of the related issues with the pandemic that's occurring, once that subsides a bit, she was very confident that the industry would be looking for people and that there would be some good opportunities going forward. So remaining positive on that, everyone. And to Peter's point, if you could use a little bit of help, reach out to a friend. So Peter, I didn't have a chance to kick off the podcast by saying happy birthday. Happy birthday from the Aftermarket Insider. What are you, about 48 now?
Yeah. So, this Emmanuel's got this great, birthday filter on me, I guess. So I wish.
What do you got planned for today, Peter? You got a big birthday, maybe a dinner at home with Diane?
Big birthday dinner at home.
All right.
And the night before that, and I think we'll go for a walk with our masks on. So
yeah, don't forget the gloves.
See how that goes.
All right. So this past November, you, Jonathan Moore, and a group of other folks at Bonnier Corporation, and it was a lean staff, put together what had to be one of the fastest produced event and one of the most detailed events that I've ever been a part of. We're talking about the Riyadh Car Festival that was a part of the Saudi season's 2030 Cultural Awakening. Could you take us through the steps, Peter, when this started to go down? When did you first get a sense that this may be an event that you would be a big part of? How did it all start?
Well, it started, it's such a cliche. So it's hard for me to kind of talk about the beginning and how it grew, but because I think you do see it in movies or read it in books about the phone call from a foreign land wanting you to come and be a part of it. But so pardon me for the cliche, but so we got a phone call. Because we're known worldwide for putting on core enthusiast automotive events. And I think that's how they found us. And somehow get a phone call inviting us to have a conversation. And fast forward, because I don't think you have 9 months on this podcast, the conversations grew and the interest grew. Fast forward, Jonathan and I, my boss, Jonathan Moore, we're on a plane to Riyadh. I think that was in June of last year, to sit down and talk with the stakeholders at the General Entertainment Authority. And they have been charged with putting on not just a spectacular car show. They were charged and continue to work on hundreds, maybe thousands and thousands of events. And they sat down with us and explained in great detail how these events fit in with Vision 2030, which is the kingdom's plan for an economic and cultural path that is drastically different than where they've been. And it is, you can Google it, Vision 2030. It's spectacular. The base that plan is built on is really a pretty wonderful thing when you consider that it's about education and healthcare and entertainment and a lot of really wonderful things that societies and the people that live in different places, and in this case Saudi Arabia, are going to experience and build. So we got invited to be a part of that. They didn't want us for our healthcare expertise or our culinary expertise. They wanted to work with us because we put on and have created a reputation for core enthusiast car shows. And so we got to reach out to a lot of our colleagues, partners, participants, and the plan was to bring 450 vehicles, 250 exhibitors, and different combinations of staff of car owners and exhibitors and their staff, media, celebrities, all the ingredients that we all grew up with knowing that make a great car show. They leaned on us to put that together. And that's what we did. And because our relationships are strong, because we Bonnier Events, wow, our portfolio of shows is pretty broad. That's what we do at Bonnier Events, is produce events. We were able to accelerate that pretty quickly over really a few months. And when you consider that nothing like this had ever been done, it really is a pretty cool thing to have been a part of. And really, when I reflect on it, this event and all the other ones that I've done over my career, this one certainly sticks out as one that I'm the most proud of being a part of.
And just to backtrack a second, the celebration, the Saudi Seasons 2030, the Vision 2030, to your point, again, this just wasn't just another car show. This was just, the car show was just an element to a much larger cultural awakening. Some of those things included the fact that you couldn't customize your vehicle. You couldn't go listen to live music. Women couldn't drive. You had things that we take for granted here in the United States that were just being awakened, again, to use that term, in Saudi Arabia. So
there weren't movie theaters a year ago. If you wanted to go to the movies, you had to go to a different country. So a concert where families could go. I mean, there's so much that, to your point, that we take for granted. In that society, they weren't there yet. And just like that, it's changing. And so I think for a lot of the people that we invited and a lot of the people that ended up joining us, and we had nearly 1,000 people from the US come to that show to help put it on. I had no idea at the time that I was not only watching history, but I was a part of history, global history in a very important country, and we were doing things that hadn't been done before like that. Now, I do want to clarify that we didn't invent the car show in Saudi Arabia. There have been car shows in Saudi Arabia for years and years and years. I know that because I tracked down the guy who has been producing them and got to know him, and I'd like to think we're friends. There's another guy in Riyadh that owns a quarter-mile racetrack.
Shakur, Drakkart.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really, I don't want to say it's in his backyard because it's a very large piece of property, but he has one, and it's as professional as anything you'd see around here, and he's got a lot of activities. I know that because I got in the car and drove out on the outskirts of Riyadh, and I went to see him, and I actually went back there 2 or 3 times because he's a cool guy, and he loves automobiles, and he loves racing, and he was somebody that that I enjoyed spending time with because we spoke the same language. And so the more time I spent there, the more people like that were kind of popping up around me that are there, and they're doing business in our industry. Now, they're not doing it to the extent that that they'd like or that we'd be familiar with, but I'd like to think that when we left after the show in November, we left something behind that they could continue to grow and nurture and make their own. And so,
well, I'm still in contact with some of the folks back there. Some of the guys that helped us with the vehicle movement and the vehicle placements, I still remain in contact with. And I got to tell you, just from speaking to them, and sometimes we FaceTime, you can see it on their face, you can hear in their voice, what we did there, the impact that it had, the lasting impressions, it's amazing. I can tell. I talked to a guy, Amr, who was one of the young guys. I think he's from Syria. That was really there when we couldn't get a vehicle started or moved. He was really a go-to guy, and he was so appreciative. Like so many of the people that we met there, to me, the big takeaway was not only the accomplishment and the fact that we allowed and afforded many folks to come and test the waters of this new international market on our dime, where they can get that firsthand experience of doing business there. But yeah, there was that feeling that we had really done something that was huge. When you were talking in the initial stages, and then you went beyond the phone calls to the actual trips to Saudi Arabia. And I know you and Jonathan were going back and forth there for a while. When did it seem to be a little bit more realistic? You know, you had the conversations, you had the back and forth. Was there a light bulb moment, Peter, where you know that this was really going to happen?
Well, yeah, that went on about half an hour before the event opened up. So, really, I would say that it wasn't a flip of the switch; it was a turn of the dimmer.
Okay.
We, we were lucky that we were working with a great team that's based in Saudi that is charged with putting on lots and lots and lots of world-class shows. They are world-class event producers. And, it's a funny question, Joe, because there's the contract thing, the contract phases, and the discussions that you have not only on the phone but in person. But that's all kind of tangible things that when you do business, you
check off those lists of action items. Yeah.
That road. But this was so amazing to be a part of. And we were so flattered to be a part of it. And to do what we did, that you're kind of pinching yourself going, is this all the way through it? Is this really going to happen? Is this really going to happen? This is too good to be true, which we would ask ourselves. And frankly, as we were talking to people and extending invitations to them, they said every conversation kind of two things came up. This is too good to be true, and what's the catch? That came up over and over and over and over and over again, so much so that we actually wove that into some of the communications and outreach that we did leading up to the show, because we worked with them on a pretty buttoned up program, and that they supported and empowered us to work on with them. That because of our experience in launching shows and managing shows, we wanted it to be too good to be true. And
some of those too good to be true things were the incentives there, because my role working with you was to work with you and select exhibitors to get them to attend the show. And when we approached them with the proposition, it included, for the lack of a better term, all expenses paid. It was a turnkey deal where we not only took care of the associated expenses for folks to travel, but everything. You didn't reach into your hand once. And that was tough for folks to digest, because first of all, the invitation and the offer, when they saw the Middle East or Saudi Arabia, a lot of the folks interpreted it like the email from the prince from Nigeria. And it wasn't until they saw your name on it or my name on it where they were a little bit more curious. But even when we talked to them about what we were going to do for them and how everything was taken care of, we still got the skepticism about, well, wait a minute, you're paying for the hotel and the airfare and the drayage. So there was a lot of items that were offered that folks hadn't heard of before. And that continued throughout the event. It was almost too good to be true for many of them. And they found out that it was true.
Yeah. And, we were careful and while it was in our best interest to come out of the gate as early as possible, we wanted to make sure that a lot of the details related to this show were defined before we made it public. And I reached out to a small community of people that I talked to and what ifed them on. But for the most part, this was really under the radar because we wanted to be completely buttoned up. We wanted to be as buttoned up as possible, and I think we all benefited from that because the 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 plan was very, to your point, very very comprehensive, and
Pretty complicated too, right? I mean,
it was well, we tried to make it as easy as possible, but yeah, it was complicated. It was complicated to get 1,000 people from this country in a specific business and 250, or I'm sorry, 450 of their cars to the other side of the world.
well, all of it too, right? I mean, the visas alone. You and I were chatting about it. It's not like you just decide to go to Saudi Arabia, like you decide that you want to go to, I don't know, Australia or China or any place in the US like Utah. You just don't go there. It's not an open society. So getting the visas for all these folks, shipping the cars, uh, the air travel, the hotel. Now, I know some of the items that we talked about, the hotel, the air travel, we really didn't have a role in that. That was handled by our Saudi partners. But just the visas alone and getting all that information, not to mention the skepticism that I think many folks here in the US have about a Middle East trip, compounded by the fact that leading up to the event, there were some things going on in the country that some folks really felt could be a little bit of a threat. So we had a lot of different satellites spinning around that were items that folks were concerned about attending, but ultimately they showed up, didn't they? The cars showed up, the exhibitors showed up, the celebrities showed up.
And we got support from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Unbeknownst to me, as this was all being ramped up, they were working on streamlining the visa process for everybody. This thing called an e-visa, that you could go online and apply for a visa and be granted a visa really pretty much instantaneously. That was all in the works. And starting out, I had this vision of, wow, how are we going to issue visas for 1,000 people to go to Saudi Arabia when you have to physically present those visas in, I don't know, a handful of consulates in this country X number of days in advance? How are we going to do that? Well, we were working on that, and then miraculously, through a lot of planning and hard work, the Saudi government turned on a website where you could get a visa like that. And that's all part of Vision 2030. That's all part of creating a really great tourism industry. And it's happening. We got to see it firsthand. I was lucky because I went out there several weeks, if not months, before the event and did some work with the team that was on the ground there building it. And I also got to get to know some people who were producing other events at the same time. Some of them were before our car show. There was a toy show that went on. There were Broadway musicals, Cirque du Soleil, concerts, and a lot of us stayed in the same hotel, and we got to compare notes and hang out a little bit. I got to see people who were producing events before ours, and they get really emotional about it. They would talk about the concerts that they were producing and how euphoric the crowd got, and these families seeing and experiencing live music for the very first time in their country. Can you imagine that? Think of how powerful that would be and how much fun it would be. So
I want to move on if I can too, because we're just stuck for time here. We're leading up to the show. We have a value proposition that in some cases is too good to believe. We trek forward, we work hard, we get the cars. UPS is working to pick up the exhibitor wares. We've got elements for the booth being sent out. We've got cars being shipped out. We've got air travel. Now we're there. Now we're on site. The event's happening. I know that you had a lot of spinning plates working there, whether it was the auction, whether it was the celebrities, whether it was the on-site automotive festivities. We had Hoonigan there. We had that Hot Wheels loop. There were so many different things happening there. On site, in your mind, what were some of the things that you really look back at now as like the highlights of what took place there? Were there a couple things that you really looked at while you were there and said, you know what, we did it?
Well, there's a lot of things that come to mind. The people that were there: Chip Foose, Joe Sebergandio, Dave Kindig, Ryan Friedlinghaus,
Dave Freiberger, you had them all there. You had
Kovac,
Richard Rawlings,
Ed Tilrock.
Well, you had Cruz Pedregon, you had Brian Loans, you had Leah Pritchard, you had the NHRA stuff. It was like everywhere you went, there was Goldberg.
Bud Brutzman. I mean, so the people that came together and got on that plane and were part of it, every single one of them. And I've got to give a special shout out to Ed Tilrock, because when the registration site went up, Ed Tilrock, who had never left the country, was the first guy to sign up to be a part of this. Lynn Heiner was there too. So we had this cool little artist collective that
very, very well received too. Ed Tilrock's. You had Savas out there from Motor Age. Didn't Jim Savas have some educational seminars he was putting on?
Jim was working on the education with us. Rick Husong was who's been a great part of some of the things that I've done over the years. And
Rick putting on the SEMA banquet.
My team from Bonnier, our team from Jonathan Moore, who was there since day one, to Jerry Pitt and yourself and Melissa. And we had some other folks from the Bonnier team join us. I mean, it was just so cool in that context to be there with all the men and women from our industry. So people highlight.
Without a doubt. And the activities, one thing that I wanted to bring up were the two activities that I attended, whereas I sat there, I was beaming. It was the exhibitor party prior to the event, that evening party where we were in the setting. We had the food, the Middle Eastern food. We had the music. We had the hookah. We had the camels. That's when I really sensed the experiencing that Middle East experience was really kind of working into my body. And then it was the Thanksgiving dinner that we had with those folks that had given up their Thanksgiving to be with us as we sat there and celebrated Thanksgiving, which was towards the end of the event. It was like, I don't want this to end.
Joe, there's a couple things that happen. We got something that was completely unplanned the day before the show, and that was this crazy amount of rain. We're in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, the driest desert that I've ever seen. And we got what seemed like feet of rain 24 hours before. You talk about, is this going to go? Is it not? When you're underwater for your event, gives you reason for pause. To your point, the next day it dried out. We were outside having this like amazing festival to open up the show. It's also been my experience with large scale shows, and this was a large scale show.
How many people you think attended, Peter, when you talk about numbers? You're good at numbers.
There were a couple 100,000 over, if you added them all up, a couple 100,000.
There'd be 20,000 people showing up towards the end of the events just to attend the concerts. I remember it never stopped.
There was a gob of people there. But
so we had a few emotional roller coasters then, huh? With the highs and the lows.
Yeah, but what happens early on in an event and what you hope for is for you to kind of lose control of it. It's kind of like a barge. It's unstoppable. Jessie Combs she and I would talk about events, and there's this time in the early stages of an event that it takes on a life of its own. And there's a great piece of video of her describing this. That happened in Riyadh, where there was this tipping point. and shuttle buses full of exhibitors started arriving, and a flood of attendees started coming through the gates, and the music's playing, and Terry Grant is winding up to do the
Hot Wheel loop.
And they're shooting a guy out of a cannon, and Joe Sebergandio's riding around in a camel. You lose control. It takes on a life of its own, and that's what all the planning is for. That's what a professional staff, a world-class staff, will deliver. We just need at that point to get out of the way and let the magic happen. And to your point, there's nothing more satisfying. And Emmanuel, there's a picture of me with some fireworks going off, and there's a picture of the fairgrounds at night. That, I mean, to look at that, those moments are kind of it's a show.
Did you have a few moments where you found yourself emotional? I had a time or two towards the end when I was saying goodbye to the guys. I was crying like a baby.
Come on, I'm an emotional wreck, anyway. So, I don't have to go to the other side of the world with an industry of friends and another industry of a whole new friends to get emotional. But it was profound to be a part of this.
What would you say, Peter, to, I remember my first call was to Bob Sheed over at McLeod. Bob's always been a supporter of everything I've done back from the time at SEMA and recently at Roadkill. And Bob jumped on board and talked to Joey Granatelli. And next thing you know, he's on board. And then you're bringing over all the celebrities, and Jerry's bringing in some folks, and Melissa's bringing in some folks. All of a sudden it started to take on some life where we were starting to attract some big names, not only in terms of the exhibitors, but the guys bringing their cars and the celebrities that were coming on board. I think ultimately when, we locked in Chip and you knew you had Richard and all these other celebrities, David Kindig coming, it was like, you know what? This is happening. This is, and considering we started in May, June, July, August, September, October, November, we had 6 months to literally take this from just dirt to an event. It really was an amazing experience. What would you say to the folks who took us up on our offer, the exhibitors that came, the celebrities that came, the car owners that came? What do you say to them now that the show's over?
Oh, well, thank you, of course. And I'm so grateful and blessed that that a lot of the people that I know were a part of it, and it really was an opportunity to meet up with some people that I didn't know and connect with them on that level. I'm kind of at a loss for words, what it meant for me and the company to have them be a part of this. But it's this is uh, this is what you hope for, and it's not by no means is it perfect. And so we're grateful that they could benefit from some of the opportunities that were there, and we're sorry about some of the speed bumps that we had, and there absolutely were some speed bumps. But
let me keep you on that for a second, Peter, because although, let's face it, you take on an event this magnitude with so many moving parts, there had to be some challenges, whether it turned out to be logistic or shipping, and most of them really were logistic related. And maybe what you're referring to, and you could correct me, is some of the cars may have had issues in transit. Some of the exhibitors, especially those folks who decided to be a part of it a little bit later on, some of the items that they had shipped out from the US to Saudi didn't quite get there in time. Above and beyond that, some damaged vehicles which there were not many of them considering how many cars came out there, but there were a few that were kind of devastating. But generally speaking, that's why you have insurance, I guess. And that's why we kind of have to plan for that. It's unfortunate, but really when you look back, not a ton of folks that didn't get their stuff, not a ton of cars that were damaged, but a few. What do you say to those folks, Peter, that may have had somewhat of an off experience in that regard?
I don't take anybody's car damage lightly. That's their
it's their baby, right?
It's their baby. It's their livelihood, and so you can't justify or not take one car getting
lightly. Yeah.
It's devastating. And in this industry, it's gut wrenching. But that's why we have insurance. And that's why we had the plan that we had, was to be able to mitigate those horrible instances. But we had world-class team working on this, and we're still working on it. And and I think for everybody that is still waiting for that stuff to kind of get worked out, they've got the confidence in knowing that that we're not hanging them out to drive or ignoring them. We're taking it very seriously, and I've been on the other end of some of those calls, and it's awkward and it's not fun, but we're really grateful that people are understanding that we're taking it seriously, and we're doing our best to make it better. And what's frustrating is sometimes, because of the distance, because of the number of people that are involved in all of the steps, it's not instantaneous answers. And sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we have to check on people and keep on people to get the answers that that everybody wants and deserves. But
I know you've been working hard on that. And Gary Case, who is a name that many folks listening to the podcast may be familiar with, Gary has had the task of working with many of the folks that were bringing out their cars, both prior to, on site, and afterwards. I know that we stayed a little bit longer than we had originally planned, Peter, due largely to the fact that some of the vehicles that came there for the auction, they didn't sell. So to your point, we wanted to make sure that those vehicles got tucked away and got secured for their ride back. I had a vehicle that actually made its way back and it got home relatively unscathed. The auction, although it was a big part of the event itself, had a little bit of, I wouldn't say a hiccup, but didn't necessarily go as planned. Was that largely due to maybe some of the pricing that some of our American feature vehicle owners could have put on the vehicle? Or do you think it could have been a result of the fact that maybe the folks there had not either been properly made aware of the fact that there was an auction, or it could conceivably be that maybe, although there's an interest in automotive there, that we're still early on? Are any of those things come to play, do you think, with regard to the auction?
Oh, there's a bunch of different reasons why it wasn't as successful as we had all hoped. And I think, like anything you do for the very first time, you learn. I'm glad that we didn't set the price on any vehicle. The car owners set the prices on their vehicles. Anytime you're going into a marketplace where there's buying and selling, certainly price is a big factor. And I'm by no means an expert in the value of collectible cars and automobiles and trucks and motorcycles. I'm not that expert. I'm glad I wasn't presumptuous to tell anybody, even you, how much to charge for your car. I've heard a lot of feedback about the fee that was placed on the sale of a car. I'm still trying to get my head around that one, because the flat fee that was placed on the sale.
That was a 30,000 flat fee.
You know, when you do it percentage wise, hey Joe, I think you had the most inexpensive car there. It was under 100,000. In your case, I could see how that fee was a pretty large percentage, but luckily,
yeah, to your point, I had a $25,000 asking price on a car. That the auction fee was actually higher than mine. So in my case, to your point, yeah, I was the cheapest car there. Where it didn't have that same ripple effect with the guy that was selling the $1 million car, where his fee was only 30,000. But
you know, what's that, 3%? I don't know. I haven't been or heard of a whole lot of auctions that there's a 3% fee.
It's usually a lot higher.
I think
it is.
So, so there's that. I think also stop for a second, reflect back on this culture. The audience there is affluent. The audience there has access to the internet. The audience there is educated.
They're smart. They're smart, educated guys there. I talk to them. They know.
They're not blinded by these cool cars and trucks. They're educated buyers. So I think there is a disconnect there. And I think that some of the sellers lost sight on the real value of their vehicles. So it's all of the above.
Yeah, okay.
You know, we can do better. We can do better.
And the objective wasn't just to have an auction. I mean, the auction was just a small part of the overall experience. So all things considered, right, you know, could it have been a bigger success? Yeah, I guess, if more cars sold. But in that same token, just the visual of it was really good. We're wrapping up a little bit, and I can go on with you. In fact, Peter, maybe we'll have an opportunity to get you to come back on in the show to talk a little bit more about the potential, because folks are wondering, is this a unicorn? Will we ever have a chance to see the Saudi Arabia opportunity going forward? In my daily calls, where I have many clients that participate, like with the Sandsport Super Show or Off-Road Expo, those folks that came with us to Saudi were incentivized. And
they were energized. They were passionate about this.
They loved it. And they want to know, are we going to go back, Joe? What do you tell the folks that are wondering if we're going back?
As soon as my phone rings, I'm getting on a plane and I'm going back. Right now, we're experiencing an unprecedented time. So until the phone rings, hold tight. If it were up to me, we'd do it tomorrow. But it's not up to me. There's a lot of things that got to fall in place. I know, given the opportunity to embrace this unicorn and ride this unicorn again, we're going to have more fun. This is going to be better in a lot of different ways. I'm grateful for the ride we've had so far, and absolutely looking forward to the next one.
Peter, last year during the SEMA show, you were already in Saudi Arabia laying the groundwork and all the final details for the event. After 20 years of being such an intimate part of that SEMA show and then being off last year, are you looking forward to getting the SEMA show this year?
You know, my optimism for live events in general is really, really high. Actually, I got an article that was recently published. You can go to my LinkedIn and see just how optimistic I am about live events. So I'm really, I guess I'm bullish on what our future holds.
And with that said, is it full speed ahead then from the Bonnier Motorsports perspective? You have events that are slated in the months of July, September, October. It's full speed ahead then, right?
Nationals, Off-Road Expo, Sandsport Super Show, Route 66. Yeah. I can't wait. Like everybody, I can't wait to get back out there with our friends, with our customers, and get our businesses going again.
And you've given them a stepping stone by giving them a credit. Those folks that attended the Saudi Arabia Car Festival, the Riyadh Car Festival, received a credit that they can use this year for one of our events. So those of you who may be listening, like maybe some of the folks from Horn Blasters or McLeod or Mickey Thompson, they have those credits that they can use for participation at our events this year. Maybe that's a nice little reminder that we can leave some of the listeners with as well.
So no, there's lots of benefits in doing business with us. We do look out for the little guy and the big guys, but we're a company that we want to embrace small businesses and cultivate them and keep them in business year after year after year, and introduce them and connect them to new opportunities, whether it's in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, or Lima. So.
Well, Matt Hay is a a pro street icon legend. He's been at the Street Machine Nationals that we hold for like the last 30 years. Matt had sent in a question wondering about the status of the Street Machine Nationals. So Matt, there's your answer. It's full speed ahead. We'll see you in Des Moines, Illinois. We'll see you in St. Paul, Minnesota. Folks, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed our time with Peter MacGillivray. Peter is our vertical motorsports leader at the Bonnier Motorsport Events series. He's a name and a face that many of you are familiar with. He's done some really great things in our industry. I'm proud to call him a friend, and I'm sure that many of you feel the same way. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We'll be back next Tuesday, the 28th of April, where we'll be joined by Ira Gabriel, Vice President of Marketing at SEMA, where we'll be talking about the current Young Gun competition that's taking place online with the virtual contest and corral. We'll also get some updated information about the SEMA show and plans looking forward. And then we'll also have on Brad Gerber. Brad's a good friend of the podcast, as well as one of the head guys at NHRA. As you know, there's been a pause in the NHRA schedule in light of the pandemic, but there's full speed ahead and green grass ahead in Brad's vision. So we'll look forward to having him on. Once again, if you have a friend that's interested in the aftermarket, let them know about the podcast if you can. We will be doing our best to get Clarence Barnes back on with the Barnes Report next week. I'd like to thank our sponsors from Pioneer for all their support. And one last time, thank you, Peter MacGillivray, for joining us on the Aftermarket Insider podcast.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, guys.
Right, folks. So with that said, thank you, Peter. We'll see you next time on the Aftermarket Insider. Thanks for listening and thanks for viewing.